Beloved by Uzbeks, Tajiks, Kyrgz, Kazakhs, Pashtuns and Turkmens, as well as Afghans, the equestrian sport known as Kokpar or Buzkashi is a rugged and traditionally extremely violent game similar to polo, with one surprising twist. Rather than hitting a ball with mallets towards a goal, players vie for control of a headless animal carcass. While at first glance this may seem a tad barbaric, it's really not all that strange when you consider footballs used to be made with pigs' bladders and baseballs are covered in cowhide. In fact, a large majority of major sports throughout the world tend to use the skin of various animals, which is perhaps less visually gory, but we're positing it's all the same to the animal involved. Buzkashi more or less cuts out the middleman and uses the somewhat freshly killed animal carcass instead of a stitched version. When you think about it, doing it this way, instead of using factory-made balls shipped in from all over the world and often treated in a variety of chemicals, it might actually even be slightly more environmentally friendly. So how did this sport come about? It's widely believed the game was first played in the Oxus Basin, now known as the Amudaya, along the border of Afghanistan. Although its beginnings are lost to time, many claim the sport began when Genghis Khan's Mongols, who brutally invaded the area, pillaged goats and sheep while riding at full speed on horseback. To retrieve their property, the legend goes, brave Afghan villagers would likewise gallop into Mongol camps to take back their stolen livestock. As the sting of invasion and thievery wore off over time, apparently the men grew to enjoy the chase and, well, a new sport was born. Whether any of this is true or not, at some point the sport really did become a thing. So what were the rules? Well, up until quite recently, there were only 2 rules. You could not talk about Buzkashi and... No, I'm totally kidding. The 2 rules were that no rider may intentionally strike another with his whip or knock an opponent off his horse. Other than that, anything goes. Armed with whips, ostensibly for use only on the horse, and equipped with special boots that hook tightly into their saddles, players fight each other fiercely for control of the prize, a carcass. Traditionally a goat that is disemboweled, decapitated, and had its limbs removed below the knee joint, the carcass would be soaked in water for at least a day to toughen the skin. In modern practice, a calf is frequently used since it is considered much more resilient. Whatever the carcass, the ultimate point was traditionally to break free from all other riders in possession of the carcass, which is easier said than done. As for more modern times, there are 3 variants of the game: Tudabarai, Kwarai, and a version played only in Kabul. The least organized version, Tudabarai, begins with as many as 500 riders in a scrum surrounding the carcass. As described by a Wall Street Journal article, they are beating one another with whips as they fought over the goat. Eventually, one rider, known as a Chapandaz, will have dipped to the ground and grabs with one hand the goat carcass, riding away from the initial circle in any direction, getting clear. In Kwarajai, play begins in a circle, but the successful rider must not only control the carcass, but also carry it around a flagpole and then drop it in a designated place, known as the Circle of Justice. Points are awarded, and play continues until one team is deemed the winner. Moving on to even more recently, as part of an effort to have Buzkashi made an Olympic sport, the Afghan Olympic Federation created official rules for a much milder version of the sport. Observed only in Kabul, this official version limits the field of play to a square with sides of 400 meters. The number of riders is also limited to official rosters of no more than 10 players, with each team having only 5 on the field at a time. In addition, as opposed to the open-ended play of the more traditional versions of Buzkashi, the official rules limit Kabul Buzkashi to 2 45-minute halves. Even more distressing to the traditionalist, the official version even has a referee on the field. As for training to master the sport, among aficionados, it is well accepted that the best Buzkashi riders, the Chapandazan, have been playing since their boyhood, have endured years of arduous training, and are often middle-aged. However, the sport would be impossible without the assistance of a stout horse, and even the proudest Chapandaz gives credit to his animal. In fact, there is a popular saying that explains precisely how important a well-trained mount is. Better a poor rider on a good horse than a good rider on a poor horse. Proud of their ancient breeds, Afghans primarily use 2 types of horses for Buzkashi: the small, swift, and sturdy Tartar, and the large breeds that came from the plains of Turkestan, Habash. Other horses used in the sport include the Arabi, Tazi, Border, and Waziri. Regardless of breeds, only uncastrated male horses, presumed to be stronger, are ridden. Special trainers, known as sayers, spend years working with their stallions. Avoiding collisions and learning to never trample a fallen rider are two of a great Buzkashi's horse's main skills, as you might imagine. The best are also able to push and even ram their way into the middle of the scrum and then remain absolutely still despite the chaos going on around, while the rider reaches down to grab the goat or calf. Since raising a horse and finding the time away from work to train one can be expensive, much of Buzkashi is financed by the wealthy. Common benefactors include warlords, entrepreneurs, merchants, and generals. An industry all to itself, children with handfuls of $50 and $100 bills from wealthy spectators crisscross the bleachers to place bets with a bookie during play, and this exchange leads to nice salaries for the Chapandazan. According to reporters, successful players are well paid, receiving thousands of dollars in tips and driving luxury automobiles in a country where the average daily wage is under $2. Of course, as you might expect, animal rights activists are aghast at the idea of adding a sport to the Olympic roster that involves fighting over a corpse and whipping horses. But Afghans remain undeterred and proud of their heritage. To quote one aficionado of the sport, "Buzkashi is Afghanistan." And now for a bonus fact. Speaking of animal carcasses, a common nickname for the American football is pigskin. But were they actually ever made of this? As alluded to, the earliest of these balls were actually made of animal bladders, sometimes the bladder of a pig, which is thought to be how the moniker pigskin came about. Animal bladders were much more accessible to the average team than more expensive items like leather. When the bladder was inflated, it was mostly round and served well as a ball for gameplay of various sports. The only trouble was actually inflating it, which was a pretty disgusting task, as you can probably imagine. Sometimes the bladder would be stuffed with things like straw or scraps of other material, but stuffing rather than inflating tended to lead to a strange shape that didn't work quite as well in certain sports. Later on, the animal bladders were sometimes encased in leather of some type, though pigskin wasn't commonly used. Luckily for all of the pro and casual football players out there, the practice of blowing up bladders to play ball fell out of practice sometime in the 1860s, around the time American football was taking its first steps branching off from rugby. This switch in material of the ball can be explained by the invention of vulcanized rubber by Charles Goodyear in 1844. Eager to ditch the gross task of inflating the bladders, footballs started being made with rubber and cowhide, which made the sport a much more pleasant experience for everyone involved, except the cow, we suppose. It is likely that rubber footballs started to be used shortly after Goodyear patented vulcanized rubber, but animal bladders were still relatively commonly used until the 1960s. Since 1955, the official NFL footballs have been made at the Wilson factory in Ada, Ohio. The hides are tanned in Ada with a top-secret football weather-optimizing tanning recipe. 130 people working at the factory produce nearly 4,000 footballs every day. Each football is made up of 4 pieces and a synthetic bladder, and each cowhide can usually make up to 10 footballs. Another question often associated with what a football used to be made out of is, how did American footballs get their shape? As you probably know, footballs are pointy at the ends and round in the middle, known as a prolate spheroid. Turns out this shape wasn't for aerodynamics. The forward pass wasn't introduced until 1906, or the ease of holding it on long runs to make a touchdown. As one witness of the Princeton-Rutgers game in 1869 remembered, the ball was not an oval, but was supposed to be completely round. It was too hard to blow upright. The game was stopped several times that day while the teams called for a little key from the sidelines. They used it to unlock the small nozzle, which was tucked into the ball, and then took turns blowing it up. The last man generally got tired, and they put it back into play, somewhat lopsided. This difficulty with the shape of the inflated ball continued on. By the time the quality of the ball's manufacturing had improved sufficiently to get the shape right, the oblong shape had been the norm for so long that it stuck, with only slight tweaks to make it a little more pointy happening over time. And the rest, as they say, is history. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below. And don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this every day of the week. For more from me, why not check out another channel I do called Highlight History? I'm going to link to that below. And as always, thank you for watching.